Lift your shirt. A doctor's plain request, but for Maribel Carter, the cowgirl hardened by pride, it cut like a blade. All her life, no hand had touched her dark skin. No eye had seen the frailty she kept hidden. Yet that night, under the glow of a lamp, and with the taste of whiskey still on Elias's lips, her walls gave way. His kiss was hot, unsteady, breaking through her defenses. The armor she carried fell, leaving a woman trembling, tender, and longing to be loved. For the first time, she knew what it meant to be seen, to be touched, not as a burden, but as a woman. Maribel Carter had grown used to living with pain as though it were part of her very bones. Since the age of 10, after her mother passed, she had learned to grit her teeth when she stumbled, to stitch her own torn skin, to press herbs against bruises no one cared to notice. Out here in the dry stretch of southern Texas, there was no room for tears or complaints. Folks worked, endured, and kept moving. But that morning, before the sun could lay its gold across the grass hills, a sharp pain shot down her side and drove her to her knees by the horse barn. Breath caught in her chest. Sweat broke across her brow, though the dawn air was still cold. Bracing a hand against the wooden rail, she pushed herself upright and muttered, "It's nothing, just a passing ache." Yet every step to drag a saddle closer blurred her vision. Maribel knew she had no choice left. It was time to ride into Bitter Creek. Swinging atop her familiar chestnut mare, she set off. The road stretched dusty and long, each hoofbeat stirring the pain sharper. All the way she pictured a gray-haired doctor, belly heavy with beer, eyes dull behind thick spectacles, breath sour with whiskey. She would let him glance her over, say a few words, and then leave. Nothing more. Bitter Creek, though, carried its own surprise. A fresh signboard read, "Whitmore Medical Practice." The clinic door stood ajar. Maribel drew a deep breath, tightened the reins, and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, not tobacco. And the man waiting there was nothing like she had imagined. Dr. Elias Whitmore, 32 years old, tall, shoulders broad enough he might have passed for a ranch hand. His white shirt was crisp, sleeves rolled to the elbow, neatly tucked into black trousers, polished shoes steady on the floorboards. His eyes, a deep brown, glowed sharp and clear, not weary, not careless. Maribel froze in the doorway, heart racing like a skittish colt. He gave a small nod, voice low and steady. "Please have a seat, miss." She hesitated, tugging her hat brim down to shadow half her sun-darkened face. His hand rose, not gripping, not forcing, just resting lightly at her elbow to guide her toward a chair. That single touch sparked through her like a jolt. Her calloused skin, long used to rough labor, had never known a man's hand placed so gently. She sat stiff, spine like a board. Elias poured water from a pitcher, then lifted his gaze, his eyes locking firm on hers. "Where does the pain lie?" The tone was professional, but under his gaze, Maribel's throat tightened. She swallowed hard, hand drifting to her left hip. He gave a slight nod. "Lift your shirt a little. Let me take a look." A simple request, ordinary from a doctor's mouth. But for Maribel, it cut deep at her pride. Never had she let anyone glimpse the frailty of her body. No man's hand had touched her dark skin. Even when she fell from horses and tore herself open, she had stitched alone. Maribel drew, in a sharp breath, fingers trembling at the hem of her shirt. Elias stepped closer, waiting, patient, urging nothing. His gaze held steady, certain yet gentle, as if saying, "Let me carry this for you." Her pulse hammered, her cheeks burned. To raise her shirt just a few inches felt like baring her whole self. And when Elias bent closer, his fingertips brushing the fabric aside until skin met skin, she flinched as though seared by flame. I don't need this." The words burst out rough, her voice breaking. Elias straightened, one brow arched, saying nothing. That calm, unshaken look, quiet as morning wind, only tangled her more. Maribel yanked her hat low, fumbled at the latch, and shoved the door open. She all but stumbled down the steps. The town square seemed to pause. Mrs. Fenora stopped sweeping outside the general store. An old man carrying buckets froze mid-stride. A few heads turned, watching the black cowgirl bolt from the clinic, face flushed, hands clamped tight on her hat brim. Maribel scrambled into the saddle. Pain jolted her side, making every motion clumsy. Her mare sensed her turmoil, rearing back with a sharp neigh. She yanked the reins hard, barely steadying the horse, then spurred her forward. Dust flew as she galloped out of town, leaving only bewildered stares behind. Her heart pounded like war drums. The ache in her hip raged hotter, yet sharper still was the memory of Elias Whitmore's steady gaze, his reassuring touch, and the crushing truth she had never wanted to face. That for the first time in her life, she was not as strong as she believed. The road from Bitter Creek to the ranch felt longer than ever. Maribel rode as if she could outrun herself. The stab in her hip made every breath short, but worse than the pain was the weight of humiliation pressing on her shoulders. The whole town had seen her burst from that clinic like a fool, face blazing red, hands trembling like some wide-eyed girl. When the cabin rose out of the dusty spread, she gritted her teeth and drove the mare hard into the yard. The chestnut reared, sides heaving, before stopping at the barn. Maribel swung down, her legs buckling a moment, but she forced herself steady. From the porch came old Isaiah, still smelling faint of wood smoke. His hair was almost all silver now, his beard tangled, his eyes worn yet sharp. He had been her father's right hand, and since Benjamin Carter's passing, the old man had lingered as a shadow guarding what remained of the ranch. "You're back," he said, glancing over her pale face before lowering his voice. "You don't look well." "I'm fine." She busied herself with the saddle, her back turned, voice clipped. "Just tired." "Tired don't turn your face white as chalk." He stepped closer, reaching as if to touch her shoulder, but she pulled away. "I mean it, girl. You ought to let that doctor in town take a look." Maribel's grip on the reins tightened, pride flaring like a struck match. "I already did." "And what did he say?" I don't need him." Her voice rose sharp, as if volume alone could shut down the concern. "I can handle myself." Silence hung heavy. Isaiah stood still, his aged eyes fixed on her, troubled, helpless. Maribel bit her lip, then turned away, dragging the mare inside the barn. She threw the saddle up on the wall peg and slammed the stall door, cutting off the conversation as firmly as her own thoughts. Night fell across the ranch. Inside her room, a weak lamp flickered against a cracked mirror. Maribel sat at the table, hands trembling on the wood. The reflection showed hollowed cheeks, dark circles under her eyes, and the dust of the day still clinging to her shirt. Without thinking, her palm pressed against her hip, right where Elias had touched that morning. One fingertip only, light as air, yet it had burned deep as a scar. No one had ever regarded her body that way, firm yet gentle, Neither pity nor curiosity, only a quiet recognition that she deserved care. Her heartbeat stumbled. She rose quickly, tossing her tangled hair back, angry at herself for letting his image play over and over. Don't be foolish, Maribel. He's just a doctor doing his job. But even as she scolded herself, she could still feel the warmth left on her skin, seeping into places she had thought frozen solid. The spasm struck hard, wrenching her back to the present. She clutched her side, teeth grinding, then dragged herself into bed. The long night carried on with wind howling over the plains, and her half-dreams filled with fragments. Elias's steady brown eyes, and the whisper of a voice saying, "Just lay back and let me take care of you." By dawn, she forced herself up. Weakness clung to her limbs, but pride was the last armor she had, and she would not lay it down. The stockyard needed cleaning, the troughs needed fresh water, and the north fence had leaned too long. She pulled on her leather gloves, hefted a shovel, and muttered, "I can do it." The sun climbed, heat burning down. Sweat ran thick. Every bend sent pain shooting like a blade through her back and side. She pressed on, jaw locked, chest pounding. By midday, she was hauling a heavy plank when her vision swam black. She staggered, legs buckling. The pain roared savage in her gut, tearing her down. "No, I can take it," she rasped, though the words dissolved. She reached for the fence rail, but the world tilted. The plank crashed, dust rose, and her body crumpled against the hard-packed ground. Sounds blurred. The wind, the hens, the horses, all twisting together. Maribel lay still, cheek against the dirt, her breath faint. Above her, the wide Texas sky blurred and dimmed. Across the yard, her chestnut mare circled, neighing loud and sharp, hooves stamping, as though calling her name. The first sound Maribel heard was the soft tap of a spoon against porcelain. It was delicate, unfamiliar. Nothing like the clang of old tinware back at the ranch kitchen. She rubbed at her eyes, lids heavy as stone. Above her stretched a ceiling the color of ivory, the air faint with herbs, clean, warm, steady. Panic jolted her upright, but dizziness pressed her back down. A tall figure moved toward her, calm as if the room itself belonged to him. Elias Whitmore. He carried a glass of water, each step measured, unhurried. "You're awake," he said, his voice low and sure. "Drink this, then take the medicine." Maribel stared, her thoughts stumbling. She glanced down and froze. The sweat-stained ranch clothes she had worn were gone. In their place was a plain white shift, loose and simple. "You," her throat rasped. "What did you do with my clothes?" For a heartbeat, Elias only looked at her, the corner of his mouth lifting. Then he let out a short laugh, not mocking, but almost helpless at her suspicion. "I did nothing," he said, tilting his head, eyes alight. "The shopkeeper's wife helped you change. Your clothes were soaked through, caked with dust, and you were unconscious. We couldn't leave you like that." Heat rushed to Maribel's face, burning up to her ears. Anger ebbed, replaced by a muddled embarrassment. She turned away, gaze fixed on the window. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Thank you." He held the glass toward her. His hand never touched hers, yet when her fingers brushed his as she took it, the faintest contact set her pulse racing. She sipped slow, the dryness in her throat easing with each swallow. Setting the glass down, she drew a steady breath. I feel better now. I'll be going. Elias was silent a long moment. Then he set his hand lightly on her wrist. Not forceful, but firm enough to hold her there. The warmth of his touch stilled her. You'll leave, he said quietly. But only when I say you're ready. Her eyes flashed, her cheeks hot with defiance. Yet his gaze did not waver, steady as a rock face, calm as a mountain dawn. The strength in that calm stole the words from her throat. Maribel sank back to the edge of the bed. Elias placed a steaming bowl of broth before her. Eat, he said. Then the medicine. She bit down hard on her lip. Never in her life had anyone set food before her and told her to rest. Never had a warm bowl been offered for her weariness. The strangeness of it unsettled her more than the pain. His hand rested on the table within reach, not commanding, yet close enough to remind her there was no running. She picked up the spoon, slow, uncertain, and began to eat. Heat slid down into her belly, easing the cramps that had gripped her. Elias said nothing, did nothing but sit and watch, not prying, not impatient, only steady as if each spoonful mattered as much as a surgeon's stitch. When the bowl was nearly empty, he placed a pointe, small tablet, in her palm, along with a swallow of water. She took it, surprising herself with her own compliance. Well done, he said softly, a brief smile flickering. The words riled her, as though she were some child praised for good behavior. She wanted to argue, to snap back, but the weight in her body pulled her down. Her eyelids drifted shut before she could summon the fight. Outside the window, dusk stretched long shadows over Bitter Creek. Inside the small room, Maribel Carter gave in to sleep. The first deep rest she had known in years. Not the sleep of bone-deep exhaustion, but of something rarer. For once there was peace. For once someone was there, keeping watch. 3 days passed inside the clean, white-walled room, the air tinged with antiseptic. Maribel Carter barely recognized herself. The woman who had always risen before dawn, hauled water, mended fences, and carried a ranch on her shoulders, now lay still beneath a crisp sheet, tended to in ways she had never imagined. Elias Whitmore left her side for little more than a moment. Each morning he came in, pulled a chair close, and with steady hands lifted the edge of her gown. His fingertips pressed lightly against her side, never intrusive, just enough to measure the ache, to ask silently with his eyes, "Does it still hurt?" At first, she had wanted to push him away, to reclaim the distance she thought she needed. Yet she found herself lying still, letting him do what he must. His touch carried a certainty she could not mistake, neither pity nor idle curiosity, but assurance. Each time his finger pressed, her brow pinched, then loosened, the breath slipping from her lips, as though a burden too heavy for years had finally been shared. By noon, the room filled with the aroma of hot broth. Elias himself carried it in, setting it down on the small table beside her bed. He spoke little, his silence a kind of patience. When she fumbled with the spoon, he turned the bowl with an absent gesture, letting the steam drift more evenly. When she set the spoon down too soon, he slid the bowl closer, his calm eyes making refusal impossible. At night, when the prairie wind slipped through the shutters, Elias would step in once more, draw the blanket higher over her shoulder, then pause to brush back the strands of hair stuck damp against her brow. Sometimes she opened her eyes half asleep and saw him bent there, a quiet figure in lamplight, before he eased out and closed the door behind him. Each time her heart raced long after he was gone. It had been years since she felt this way, since before her mother died, when gentle hands had once tucked her in, wiped her fevered face, whispered comfort in the dark. That sense of being cared for had vanished with childhood. Now it returned without warning, splitting the armor she had worn so long. On the third night, sleep would not come. The weakness she had buried beneath pride pressed upward, raw and unstoppable. She turned her face into the pillow, a stifled sob breaking loose, small at first, then shuddering, until the sound filled the quiet room. She bit her lip, tried to silence herself, but the harder she fought, the more her shoulders shook. The door opened softly. Footsteps, firm yet careful, crossed the floor. Elias. He had left a book unfinished in his office. The lamplight still glimmered in his eyes. Maribel jerked upright, yanking the blanket over her head, heart hammering. She couldn't let him see. No one could see. He sat at the edge of the bed. Gently, he pulled the blanket down from her face. His hand came to rest on her hair, stroking slow and tender. The simple touch undid her. Her sobs broke free, no longer held back. Years of silence, of shouldering every wound alone, now spilling into the open. She wept hard, trembling, as though the years themselves had found a crack to escape through. Elias faltered. His hand tightened slightly in her thick hair, his eyes uncertain. For the first time, the man who had always seemed steady and controlled looked lost. Her tears struck deep into him, carving at the calm he carried. And then, as though instinct alone guided him, he bent down. His lips touched hers. The kiss was brief, gentle, not burning but steady, like a quiet command for the storm to hush. Yet to Maribel it was fire. Her body stiffened, then softened, her sobs tapering into sharp breaths, then silence. When Elias realized what he had done, he pulled back at once. He rose as if burned, retreating toward the door. His voice was hoarse. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." He turned away, left the room, the click of the door echoing behind him. Maribel lay still, face buried under the blanket, skin blazing hot. Her lips tingled. Her heart thudded so wildly it seemed it might break free. Shame tangled with a strange, unfamiliar ache, an ache that longed not to end. In the dark, she covered her face with both hands, fighting the sound of her own ragged breathing. For the first time, she did not know if she was afraid, overjoyed, or hungry for more. Only this was certain. Elias Whitmore had touched something deep inside her, a place she had hidden away beneath pride and loneliness for far too long. That morning, Elias walked Maribel to the door of the clinic. Both carried the memory of the night before, the tears she had tried to hide, his hand smoothing her hair, and the kiss that still burned between them. Neither spoke of it. There was only averted eyes and a short farewell. "Go home," he said, voice even. "But come back at the week's end." "I'll need to check your side. I know," she murmured, eyes fixed on the ground. They parted in silence, each afraid of naming what had truly happened. 4 days later, Maribel rode into Bitter Creek for supplies. She meant to keep clear of the clinic, yet the thought of Elias stirred in her chest more than the ache in her hip ever had. The medicine and rest had eased her pain, but the memory of his eyes unsettled her more than illness. At the general store, she wrestled a sack of flour nearly twice her size. The weight slipped, dragging her off balance. A firm hand caught it. "Careful, Maribel." The low, familiar voice came at her ear. She spun around. Elias Whitmore stood close, his eyes bright, the scent of soap and oak wood clinging to his shirt. Why are you here?" she stammered, heat flooding her cheeks. "I had business at the post," he said with a faint smile. "But what I'd rather know is why you haven't come back for your check." Maribel turned away, clutching the sack. "I'm better." "No need better," he repeated softly. "Yet you almost dropped this because you've no strength." His hand brushed hers on the sack, the touch small but searing. She pulled back, but Elias had already lifted the flower to his shoulder with ease. His frame bore the weight without effort, while she could only watch. "I'll carry it," he said simply, not asking. Maribel bit down on her lip, torn between pride and relief. Watching the sack ride steady on his broad shoulder, she felt an odd comfort she'd long denied herself. They walked together down Bitter Creek's main road. Dust rose in swirls, the sun glazing the street gold. Eyes followed them. From the store porch, Mrs. Fenora hid a smile behind her hand. A cluster of cowhands outside the saloon whistled. Voices rippled through town. "That black cowgirl walking with Dr. Whitmore. No, he's a man of education. He wouldn't—" Maribel heard every word, her face burning hot. She quickened her pace, eager to escape the stairs. Yet Elias strode steady, unshaken, as if the whispers were nothing more than wind. "The door's always open," he said low, "just for her. If you're tired, don't wait to come." She faltered, her heart pounding. His words were plain, but beneath them lay a care she had never known. She bit down hard, choosing silence. At the hitching posts, Elias eased the flower onto her pack mule. He brushed his hands clean, his eyes lingering on her face with a gentleness that unsettled her more than the gossip. "Be careful, Maribel. You're not strong enough, yet." She nodded, saying nothing, and climbed into the saddle. But as she rode out of Bitter Creek, she could not shake the memory of his gaze. Steady, sure, stripping the town's whispers of their weight. Clutching the reins tight, her chest thrummed with a new kind of fear, not of what folks might say. No, what scared her most was knowing she might no longer be able to escape the pull of Elias Whitmore's eyes. In the days that followed, Elias Whitmore lingered at the edges of Maribel's life like a shadow. No matter how she tried to avoid him, he always found a way to appear. A greeting as she left the store, a packet of medicine brought to the ranch, a pause along the road to ask after her health. His quiet persistence unsettled her, left her half grateful, half furious. One late afternoon, the talk of Bitter Creek spread like wildfire. Mrs. Marquette, who ran the boarding house, was selling off her herd to pay debts. 30 fat cattle, priced low enough to draw every rancher's eye. For Maribel, it was the chance she had been waiting for, the chance to rebuild Carter Ranch. But her pockets were light, her means too thin. She steeled herself, hand shaking as she signed the draft note. Just then the clinic door creaked and Elias stepped inside, white shirt bright against the smoke-stained walls. "If money's all that stands in your way," he said evenly, "let me take care of it." Maribel snatched the paper back, cheeks blazing. "This isn't your business. I can handle it myself." Her stubbornness halted him a moment. He studied her, eyes steady, probing the walls she wore. Then the corner of his mouth lifted, not mockery, but something he could not hold back. It's because you always say I can handle it myself that I can't look away. The words froze her, stripped her of reply. Mrs. Marquette, wise enough to sense the storm, slipped out and left them alone. Silence pressed heavy between them. Elias leaned closer, voice low. I can help you. But I want us to speak plain. Tonight. At the clinic, Maribel swore she would refuse. Yet when night fell, her feet carried her to his door, her heart pounding as the lamplight spilled over his square jaw and steady frame. He motioned for her to sit. This time there was no careful preamble. He stood before her, shoulders squared, voice ringing with certainty. I like you, Maribel. Stop trying to be strong against me. The room went still. She sat rigid, eyes wide. From a man like him, a doctor, educated, respected by the whole town, such words were almost impossible to believe. If you mean to toy with me, she said hoarsely, find another. I am not your amusement. The words cut sharp, her stare cold, but beneath the blanket her hand trembled. Elias faltered, then anger surged. He crossed the floor in 2 strides, his hands seizing her shoulders, pushing her back against the narrow cot. Maribel gasped, breath short, and before she could move, his mouth was on hers. The kiss came fierce, poured with frustration, hunger, and the helpless fury of a man worn thin by her pride. For a heartbeat she thought to resist. Then the strength drained from her limbs. Her fists clenched in his shirt instead of pushing him away. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the raw shock of being truly seen, of having her guarded weakness met with fire. She yielded, soft as a cat curling, into warmth, letting the kiss devour the words she could not speak. When Elias pulled back, breath ragged, regret flickered across his eyes. I shouldn't have. Maribel lay still, face flushed, heart hammering to the edge of breaking. She did not know if she ought to rage, to hide, or to confess the dangerous truth rising inside her. She only knew this. From that moment on, the space between them would never be the same. That night, the clinic still carried the sharp scent of medicine and shadows. The oil lamp flickered low, throwing a thin gold circle across the floorboards. Elias faced her squarely, voice steady, yet weighted with intent. I mean to prove what I've said. And you, Maribel, put aside a little of that pride and give me the chance. She stiffened, eyes sliding away. Her heart thudded like an unbroken colt. Put aside pride. Pride was the only armor she had ever owned, the shield that kept the world's scorn from cutting her raw. Strip it away, and what remained of her? I don't need... Her voice cracked. Save those words for someone else. Elias did not press. He only held her with that gaze, firm, unyielding, but touched with gentleness. When he left, she sat clutching the fabric of her dress, her thoughts twisted into knots. The next day she worked the fences, rope biting into her palms, but her mind wandered. Each pull of the cord summoned the memory of his hand brushing her side. Each gust of wind seemed to carry his voice. Put aside pride. Old Isaiah watched from a post, whittling a stick, his eyes narrowed. The girl's not herself, he muttered. Then he called out, Maribel, come here. She walked over, wiping sweat from her brow. That far-off look in your eyes, he said. It ain't the fence that's got you tangled. Tell me, is it that town doctor? Maribel pressed her lips tight. Child, Isaiah went on, voice slow and worn like prairie wind. A rich man always has his price. Remember this. Nothing in this world comes free. The words struck like stone in her chest. She turned away, but the warning echoed all through the afternoon. What if he truly wanted something of her? By sundown, the sky burned red behind the hills. Hoofbeats rang across the yard. Maribel looked up and her breath faltered. Elias Whitmore rode in on his chestnut horse, reining to a stop before the porch. He dismounted, his stride straight and sure. Just one supper, Maribel. At my house, her pulse lurched. I can't. Only one meal. Nothing more. His eyes held hers, steady as stone. No price. Just you and me at a table. The words left her mute. She wanted to refuse, yet in his gaze there was something that unraveled her will. Elias dipped his head, then led his horse away, leaving dust swirling in the yard. All that evening she tossed in bed, her heart pulled in two. Isaiah's warning on one side, and on the other, the strange longing Elias stirred. At last she rose and opened the old wooden chest. Most of her dresses were faded work clothes, but at the bottom lay one carefully folded, the dress she had sewn 3 years before for Harvest Festival. Rough fabric, but still carrying its soft green shade. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. She changed, braided her hair tight, and faced the cracked mirror. The reflection showed a weathered woman with sun-dark skin, but tonight a new light flickered in her eyes. Her mare was saddled and waiting. Maribel swung into the seat and rode beneath the moonlit sky, the dirt road pale as bone. At the edge of Bitter Creek stood Elias's house, larger than she'd imagined, wide porch and polished door gleaming in the lamplight. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Sliding down from the saddle, her hands shook as she raised them to knock. The sound echoed against the quiet night. The door swung open. Warm light spilled into the dark, and Elias stood there, silent. His gaze found her, and in that look every excuse she had clung to dissolved like smoke. Elias's house glowed warm in the darkness, an island of light on the edge of Bitter Creek. When the door opened, Maribel felt her breath catch. The table inside was dressed in white linen, laid with food she had never tasted. Steak seared golden, mashed potatoes rich with butter, bread still warm, and red wine gleaming like blood beneath the flicker of candlelight. A vase of fresh flowers sat at the center, the whole scene too fine, too strange, as though she had stepped into someone else's dream. She stood frozen at the threshold, hand clutching at her dress. Never had she believed such a sight would be set for her, a black cowgirl worn by dust and sweat. Elias smiled faintly, extended his hand. "Come in." Hesitation lingered, but she placed her palm in his. That single contact sent her heart into a gallop. He pulled out a chair for her, the gesture polished, gentle, like some gentleman from a book. For a long while, the only sound was the clink of knife and fork. Maribel fumbled with the steak, her blade slipping, a piece skidding off her plate. Color surged to her face. Elias laughed softly, eyes alight. "Here." He cut it neatly, sliding the pieces onto her plate, his hand brushing hers in passing. She lowered her gaze, biting her lip, then tasted the food. Butter and meat melted across her tongue, foreign and intoxicating. Elias set down his glass, his voice steady but weighted. "Maribel, I meant every word I've spoken. I want to keep you safe. I want to care for you. I don't want to watch you fight the world alone. pretending you've no need of anyone, and for me to do that. Let yourself be mine." The silver slipped from her hand, landing with a faint clatter. She bent her head, shoulders trembling. His words broke over her like a storm, stripping the armor she had carried for years. "I—" Her voice was no louder than a breath. But Elias did not wait. He drained his wine, eyes never leaving her face, then rose and crossed the table. Before she could lift her gaze, his hands were on her shoulders, pulling her to her feet. His mouth pressed hard against hers, hot, consuming, stealing her breath. The taste of wine spilled between them, sharp, burning, then sweet. Their breaths tangled, harsh and desperate. His hand slid from her shoulder to the curve of her back, drawing her close while hers found the back of his neck, clinging as if the floor itself were falling away. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, his blazing, hers wide with fear and longing. Then they sank again into a kiss, deeper, fiercer. They came together like two wanderers lost too long, finding at last a place to rest. Heartbeats pounded, hands gripped and searched, not to claim but to steady, to anchor. Elias held her tighter, his kiss relentless, as though he could swallow the silence that had caged her for years. Maribel jolted when his hand slid lower, fingers grazing the hem of her dress. Reflex pulled her hand to his wrist, her eyes sparking with resistance. But he did not push further. He lifted his head, searching her eyes, an unspoken plea there, steady yet trembling, as though he might lose her if he let go. Then his mouth found hers again, fiercer still, tasting of wine and every feeling he had refused to name. The force of it weakened her hands, her guard falling piece by piece. She let his arms close around her, let the heat of his palms move against her through the thin fabric. In that moment, the burdens she carried fell away. No past, no pride. Only a man and a woman meeting in the loneliness they both had borne. That night, by candlelight, Maribel Carter and Elias Whitmore gave themselves over fully. Pride and fear were stripped aside. What remained was flesh and breath, trust and fire. Two souls entwined in the fragile, dangerous hope that love might be born not from strength, but from the courage to be weak. Dawn crept through the curtains, a pale light spreading across the white sheet. Maribel stirred, her chest still tight with the echo of the night before. Turning, she saw Elias seated by the window, his shirt draped loosely over the chair. Broad shoulders hunched slightly, his tall frame cast long in the morning glow. On the table beside him, a cup of coffee sat steaming, untouched. He stared out into the fading night, voice low, not spoken to her so much as confessed into the silence. "I used to think if I studied hard enough, dressed clean enough, earned plenty of money, the past would vanish. But they still looked at me and saw nothing more than a farmer's boy." Maribel sat upright, listening. His words unfolded slowly, heavy as stones laid one by one. Back east, he had once been engaged to a woman of wealth. Beautiful, polished, admired. But at a grand party, she had turned on him with a smile sharp as glass. "Even with that doctor's coat, you're still only a rancher's son. I'll have to teach you how to behave like a gentleman." The room had roared with laughter, leaving him standing bare, humiliated. "I left the next morning," Elias said at last, eyes fixed on the gray horizon. "Since then, I've been chasing proof that they were wrong." Silence fell. Within it, Maribel's own past rose up like dust from the plains. My mother died when I was 10, she murmured, voice thick. I grew up beneath stairs that never let me forget. I was the black girl. Always. To be seen, I had to work twice as hard. To be respected, I had to endure twice as much. And still, it was never enough. At last, their eyes met. In Elias's deep brown gaze was a wordless recognition. In Maribel's dark eyes, long-carried pain glimmered as if, for the first time, someone truly saw it. Maybe, Elias drew a breath, maybe we carry the same wound. Never enough. No matter what we do, Maribel lowered her eyes to her hands. Rough palms, scarred from rope and hammer, stained by soil. Hands no one had ever called beautiful, only tools to prove her strength. Elias rose and came near, sitting at the edge of the bed. He reached out, slowly, as if to give her time, and lifted her hand into his. But to me, his voice was quiet, sure. These hands are what make you worthy. He bent his head, pressing his lips gently to each calloused finger. Not hurried, not hungry, reverent. Each kiss fell like a soft erasure, washing away years of shame. Maribel trembled, her throat closing. For the first time, she did not see her hands as ugly proof of labor. She saw them as they were, testament to survival, to pride, to value. And for the first time, someone regarded them as treasure. In that moment, no further words were needed. Breath slowed, the morning stilled. Her hand remained in his, a silent promise blooming between them. Whatever the world might say, they would face it together, unbowed. The whispers began like a faint breeze, then swelled into a storm. Folks muttered in the cafe, bent close in the general store, and even smirked outside the church doors. That black girl has bewitched Dr. Whitmore. Maribel heard it in every glance cast her way. Each step along Bitter Creek's main street grew heavy. Her back, once straight, now bowed, her eyes lowered to the dirt. Once more she had been pushed into the old place, looked down on, never good enough. Back at the ranch, she worked herself near to breaking, trying to drown out the words. But at night, the mirror betrayed her. Hollow eyes, a face tightened by the strain of hiding shame. Perhaps she should leave Elias before she became nothing but a burden to him. One Saturday morning, she had no choice but to ride into town for salt and seed. The moment she entered the market, the sting of voices rose. Gazes pierced her like knives. She kept her head low, gathered what she needed fast, praying to escape unseen. Then his voice cut through the din, calm, clear, impossible to ignore. Maribel. She froze. There he was, Elias Whitmore, standing in the open, white shirt pressed, hair pushed back by the wind. He did not avoid her. Instead, he stepped forward until he stood at her side. The market erupted. See? He's bold enough to stand with her. Our doctor, and that colored girl. Maribel's breath caught. She wanted to flee, but Elias leaned close, his voice low yet strong enough for all to hear. I'll walk with you. Her eyes widened. Before she could object, he reached for the sack of salt in her arms and lifted it himself, as though it were only natural. When she shrank under the weight of their stares, he shrugged off his long coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was a small act, but in that charged silence it thundered like a declaration. A claim laid plain before the whole town. This woman is mine, and I am proud of it. Maribel's throat tightened. Heat rose under the coat, but warmer still was the steady beat in her chest. For the first time, she did not stand alone beneath the weight of their scorn. The crowd hushed for a heartbeat, then buzzed louder, harsher. Yet Elias walked on, stride sure, calm, unshaken, every gesture firm as if gossip meant nothing beside the woman at his side. Maribel slowed, stealing a glance at him. His eyes did not flinch, did not falter. Instead, they burned with quiet conviction. And she knew then this trial was not hers alone. It was his as well, and Elias had chosen to face it beside her, not turn away. In that moment, in the noise of the market, with his coat resting across her shoulders, Maribel Carter understood. She was no longer standing by herself. That morning, Bitter Creek lay beneath a thin veil of mist, stretched across the prairie like a bridal cloth. Dawn winds rustled the porch rails, carrying the sound of horses neighing far off, a hymn of sorts for a day unlike any other. On the hill where the humble wooden chapel stood, the lamps had been burning since before sunrise. No rows of bright flowers, no choir filling the air, only a handful of wild blooms plucked from the creek bank, set in a clay jar. Yet to Maribel it was more than she had ever dared to dream. The gathering was small. A few kind families from town, Mrs. Marquette with her gentle smile, the grocer and his wife, and even some neighbors who had once gossiped harshly but now came, curiosity in their eyes. The air held something solemn, something strange, the wedding of a respected doctor to a black cowgirl once scorned. People whispered, but none aloud. Outside the chapel, Maribel stood with her palms clammy despite the mild air. Her heart hammered, her knees unsteady beneath the cream dress sewn from old cloth by Mrs. Marquette's patient hands. It was simple, not fine, yet in the pale light of morning the rough stitches looked tender. Her hair was pulled into a neat bun, stray curls trembling in the breeze. Her arm rested on the steady frame of Isaiah, the old hand who had raised her after her father's death. His suit was worn thin, the seams frayed, yet he stood proud as an oak rooted deep. He bent close and whispered, voice gravelly but warm, "Your father would be proud, Maribel." The words flared in her chest like fire. Tears gathered, but she smiled and nodded. Today she was not walking to prove her strength. She was walking to accept love, the very thing she had once thought the world would never grant her. The chapel doors opened. The wheeze of an old organ filled the air, slow and reverent. All eyes turned. Maribel drew a breath and stepped inside. As in years past, she felt the weight of every gaze upon her, the silent judgment pressing close. But this time, something was different. At the altar stood Elias, shoulders broad, eyes locked on her, unblinking, unshaken, as though nothing else existed but her steps down that narrow aisle. His hand reached out, steady as stone. Isaiah placed hers in it, giving a firm squeeze before stepping aside. That moment, before all the town, felt like a vow already. She was no longer alone. The service was plain. The preacher's words rose beneath the rough timber roof, light streaming through small windows to fall across the couple like a blessing. Maribel's heartbeat matched the rhythm of the vows. Do you, Maribel Carter, take Elias Whitmore as your husband for all your days? Her throat tightened, but her voice came clear. I do. And do you, Elias Whitmore, take Maribel Carter as your wife for all your days? I do, he answered, firm as iron, without a breath of doubt. The preacher raised his hand. Before God and this community, I pronounce you husband and wife. Elias turned, lifted her chin, and their eyes met. Steady, deep, unguarded. His lips touched hers, the first kiss given before witnesses. The chapel hushed. For once, the whispers died. The glow of the candles blurred the edges of every prejudice, every sneer. That kiss was more than a vow. It was a proclamation. Their love stood taller than scorn. Maribel trembled, but not with fear. Each pounding beat in her chest, each breath shared, was proof that she belonged, not only in Elias's heart, but in the light of the very community that had once cast her out. Outside, the chapel bell rang long and clear, echoing over the Bitter Creek plains and rolling into the lavender hills beyond. The sound carried like a prayer, blessing a beginning strong enough to outlast loneliness, gossip, and all the jagged miles behind them. Maribel gripped Elias's hand, felt its warmth unyielding. In his gaze shone only one truth. Together, nothing else mattered. They walked out beneath the noon sun, the chapel doors flung wide. On the porch, townsfolk lingered, some with eyes still doubtful, but others with hesitant smiles and awkward well-wishes. Isaiah stood apart, his old hand brushing away a tear as his lips curved into a quiet smile. Maribel drew in a breath of the fresh prairie air, the kind that felt like a second birth. She leaned close, whispering so only Elias could hear. "Thank you for choosing me when the world never would." He squeezed her hand tighter, his voice steady, eyes shining. "Not choosing, Maribel. Fate, and under the wide Texas sky, with the chapel bells fading into silence, their love began, simple, fierce, undeniable. After the small wedding in Bitter Creek, Maribel moved into the upstairs rooms above Elias's clinic, a place once filled only with the scent of medicine, the rustle of papers, and silence now carried footsteps, sudden laughter, and even the occasional quarrel when their habits collided. Maribel was used to ranch life, up with the rooster, driving horses out to pasture, tightening fences. Here the rhythm was strange, sorting bottles, recording patients, boiling water for emergencies. She fumbled often. The first time she brewed tea for Elias, she doubled the sugar. He sipped once, face twisted. She planted her fists on her hips. "So the doctor's fussier than a cow in heat, is he?" Elias laughed loud, a sound rare in those quiet rooms. He tipped the cup back, swallowed the whole thing just to tease her, then set it down with mock triumph. She shot him a glare, half angry, half flustered, lips twitching with a smile she fought to hide. One evening she tried mending the sleeve of his white coat. The stitches came out crooked, a snake's trail on fabric. When Elias walked in, he stopped, chuckling. Maribel flushed, hurled the coat at him. "Go on, laugh. Wear it tomorrow if it pleases you." He caught it, his eyes warm. "I've never seen anyone so worse, but never seen it done so dearly either." The words left her stunned. No mockery, no disdain, only fondness. The clinic, too, held moments she couldn't forget. One afternoon, Elias was bandaging a patient while she tried keeping notes. Her hand shook, ink spilling across the page. In panic, she tried to cover it, but Elias turned, tapped her forehead gently. "Wreck the ledgers all you want. I'll patch you up first." She widened her eyes, then pouted in false anger, but inside her heart tripped fast. weakened by the ease with which he teased her into softness. At night, Bitter Creek sank into stillness, oil lamps throwing gold shadows across wooden walls. In the small upstairs room, Elias drew her close, kissing her deep, long, until every distance that had once stood between them dissolved. The tang of antiseptic lingered faint in the air, but stronger was the heat of two bodies finding each other without words, only the pulse of shared breath. There were nights they forgot the world entirely. Papers scattered across the office floor, fluttering like startled birds as they clung to one another in a hunger long denied. He held her tight. She gripped his shoulders as though letting go might shatter everything they had built. Other nights they returned to her old ranch cabin, lying beneath a window cracked open to silver moonlight. The glow traced their skin, making each touch sacred. Maribel tilted her head, allowing Elias to whisper things in her ear she had never dreamed to hear, words that turned her loneliness into memory, not prison. In his arms, the years of solitude slipped away. Night after night, they found each other again, as though every embrace was a kopsha, confession. Words became unnecessary. A kiss, a grip of hands, the sound of breath shared. It was enough to promise neither would ever have to stand strong alone again. Still, Maribel sometimes bristled at her clumsiness in this new life. Once, when she dropped an entire tray of medicines, she stormed to leave in shame. Elias caught her by the waist, his chuckle soft against her ear. "You don't have to be perfect, Maribel. Just being you is more than I ever hoped for." Her hands clenched, then relaxed. In his hold she closed her eyes, the old wounds and cruel stares of the past melting away. Their marriage was not without trials. Gossip still clung to the streets. Work at the clinic surged and ebbed, leaving them weary at times. Yet for Elias, every moment beside her proved that the farmer's son once mocked had found something greater than respect. A family. And for Maribel, the home they built gave her more than love. It gave her permission to falter, to soften, and still be cherished all the same. On quiet nights, lying in his arms, she recalled the words that had lifted her burden. "You don't have to be perfect." And she knew, deep down, she had found her safe harbor. Time moved as quietly as an underground river, seeping through the hard earth until barren fields bloomed green again. Since the day Maribel walked through the chapel doors in her plain dress, more than 10 years had passed. Old wounds, old whispers from Bitter Creek, lingered now only like faint echoes carried by wind. The rooms above the clinic were no longer silent. Children's voices filled the stairwell. Laughter rang down the hallways. Elias and Maribel had 2 children, Josiah, dark-skinned with his father's bright eyes, and Ruth, curls springing wild, her smile radiant as the first summer sun. The clinic lamps still burned late into the night, but now it was more than a place for Elias to heal the sick. Josiah often stood quietly at the counter, watching his father grind herbs and measure tinctures, absorbing patience and precision. Ruth preferred her mother's lap, begging for stories about wild horses on the ranch, harvest feasts, or long rainy days when the land felt endless. Maribel never imagined life could hold such calm. The ranch outside town had flourished. The herd was 3 times what it had been when she toiled alone. The old wooden house had been rebuilt, its porch widened so the whole family could sit together and watch sunsets bleed across the horizon. Summer evenings glowed with wind and laughter. One dusk the sun sank red as fire behind the far ridges, In the backyard, Elias knelt with Josiah, rope in hand. Watch close. Loop here. Pull tight. Always steady. Josiah's small fingers fumbled, the knot slipping loose. Elias chuckled, guiding his son's hands with his own. From the porch, Maribel watched, heart swelling with a peace too vast to name. Ruth rested against her chest, drifting toward sleep, head nestled where her heartbeat steadied. Maribel stroked the child's hair, eyes fixed on the sight of father and son. Each careful gesture from Elias, each earnest frown from Josiah, painted a picture of family she had once thought beyond reach. Isaiah had grown frail. His steps slowed, his hands trembled, yet his smile kept its warmth. He spent his days on the old wooden chair by the porch rail, watching the children play with pride shining in his tired eyes. "You see, Maribel," he murmured one evening, voice rough but full of light, "if your father were alive, he'd be smiling just as I am now." Maribel clasped his worn hand, eyes brimming. She understood then that her father's true legacy was not only land or cattle, but the spirit to endure, to never bow. That spirit lived now within her family, in every laugh, every embrace, every small footstep. That night, when the children were asleep, Maribel stepped onto the porch. The Texas sky spread wide above, dense with stars. Elias followed, draping a blanket over her shoulders. She leaned into him, whisper soft as the breeze. "Thank you, Elias, for never giving up on me." He looked at her long eyes deep as the day she first met him, though tempered now with peace. He wrapped his arms around her, holding as though time itself might steal the moment. "You gave me a new life," he said, voice rough but steady. "All I ever searched for ended here, with this home, with you and with our children." She closed her eyes, resting in his embrace. The heart that once hardened from years of struggle now softened. Above them, stars blazed. Around them, the prairie wind hummed. In the quiet, crickets sang. Two souls who had begun with mistrust and resistance now stood as family, unshaken by storms past. Their love was never loud, never flawless, but it was a love that stayed, a love that chose patience, chose to build. Together, they had made a legacy, a home, a thriving ranch, and children carrying both strength and gentleness. In the silence of the night, Maribel squeezed his hand. Elias's palm closed over hers, the same way it had the first time, cherishing, steady, unyielding. That, above all, was the true inheritance they would leave behind. Not cattle, not the clinic, but a love enduring enough to outlast time. One night they stood together by the ranch fence, stars burning above, the herd dozing in the field. Elias wrapped his arms around her, whispering into her hair, "The greatest legacy we'll ever leave is this love." Maribel leaned her head to his shoulder, breathing the cool prairie air, the scent of earth and grass. And she knew it was true. Every wound they had borne, every sneer, every lonely night had been transformed into the foundation of their present. A home, a ranch alive with laughter, a love that had chosen, day after day, to endure. That was their legacy, for Josiah, for Ruth, for Bitter Creek, and for the Texas land itself, which had witnessed their love bloom, survive, and stand tall as the endless sky. When the last light of day sank beneath the horizon, Their story lay like a hymn across the prairie, proof that true love needed no grandeur. Only two souls willing to remain, through pride, through scorn, through trials, until all that was left was the steady, quiet triumph of belonging. And so, in the laughter of children, in the eyes of the old, and in the steadfast bond of two hands joined, Maribel and Elias Whitmore left behind their legacy. Not wealth, not cattle, but a love strong enough to outlast the years.